You start with a hand in front of the camera. We're going to try that again. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Well, good evening. I'm going to turn down the screen intensity a little bit, and we'll do that. And hopefully it gets rid of some blue dots. Hey, good evening. Great to have you here for a bright spot in the week. It was a beautiful day here in Connecticut. Hopefully it was beautiful where you are as well. Always great to be here, just to have some time to spend in the scriptures together. Tonight we're going to be in the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to be talking about two Lazaruses. Say that real fast sometime, all right? That'll be our study for tonight. Again, in the Gospel of Luke, why don't we have a word of prayer, and we'll go from there. Let us pray. Thank you, Lord, for a chance just to be together tonight and to open up your holy book and to encounter your living word. We ask that you minister unto us by your Spirit and encourage our curiosity. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Yeah, and speaking of curiosity, I got to fix my camera again. I don't think last week we had a bit of a challenge with our camera. I'm hoping tonight hoping we got that fixed, but it is a little finicky. Yeah. So anyway, I'll fix it if we need to fix it as we go along, of course. So let me think. Threw me off here a little bit. Oh yeah. So make sure that if you're with us in real time, Wednesday night, between say 7 and 7:30 or so, do come and you can go ahead and give us your prayer requests. I'm going to try to fix this again. This is getting a little crazy. Oh, what's going on with this silly thing here tonight? Seems like if I sit really still, maybe it won't cause any trouble. I think when I move my hands around or something, I don't know. However, yeah, between 7 and 7:30, feel free to just get on the keyboard there and message us and send in any prayer requests that you might have, because we always conclude the program with prayer, and we would certainly like to include those that you're thinking about. And as always, if you have any questions about the text, just go ahead and message that as well, and see if we can't handle that. Okay, that's the plan. And I'm going to sit very still so as not to disturb. Didn't matter. It still went crazy. I think we're going to have a night like this tonight. Oh boy, let's try this one more time, and then I'm not too sure what to do about that. Anyway, what I am doing this evening is I'm working with a lot less light here, and the intention was that would help some things. But you know what? I'm going to monkey around here with our lighting a little bit, see if we can't rectify that a little bit. I don't know. Try again. Just like speak to the hand, right? Okay, and now we got a focus issue, but that'll work. That'll straighten out. Let me just try that again. So, anyways, when our daughter was a teenager, she would sometimes say, "Talk to the hand," when she didn't want to communicate. Well, I do want to communicate with you. I'm really not trying to be rude, but we are having some camera challenges. So you would think I don't test these things, wouldn't you? You'd think I just throw this stuff together and then, hopefully it works when we get here on Wednesday night. Well, I got news for you. I test everything. I go through all the details, make sure everything's all perfect and working great. And then we sit down here and we end up with this kind of stuff. So, it's crazy, but that's the way it is. So I'm going to make a request. Miss Kay, could you bring down our other lights, please? What we're going to do is we're going to change our lighting here in real time while you folks are here for Bible study. And I'm going to ask Miss Kay to bring some lights around. We'll see if we can't improve on some things here. But yeah, oh well, we do the best we can, right? We really do. And you folks who have been with us, you know how this is kind of a circus around here, right? And hopefully the content's good so that you got good audio. We're hoping that you can hear everything just fine. I think you can. So we're going to just go forward. She's going to bring some lights around for us. Hun, I got, you can plug it in right there and unplug the other light if you need to. And we will try to, we're going to do this in real time here. So what we're going to actually do is let's have something to laugh about since Things are so crazy here tonight. Check this out. Hey, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. There you go. So tonight we're going to have a lesson about being in the bosom of Abraham. He's got his Kit Kat bars stuck in his shirt there. And okay, here we are. We're going to make some adjustments. You guys can just enjoy that picture for a little bit. And let's see if we can get some things here, improved on. Now, we'll come back around here again and try this and see if we can. I think we made it worse. All right, this is crazy. Well, now I'm like a ghost figure. Let me see if I can fix some of that. Oh, gee whiz. And let's do some of that. Let's do some of this. Oh, this is hilarious, right? Well. Okay, so let me see if we can balance that. Okay, and I think we're going to get kind of better a little bit. Let's do some of that. And we'll do some of this. Okay, I think that's better. I think we're doing better. Okay, how's that? Now, hopefully this silly thing doesn't jump around too much. Okay, here we go. Maybe somebody's out there praying for our camera lights or something. Whatever you're doing, thank you. All right, there's always something here to laugh about. You know, been calling this a bright spot in the week for a long time because, well, we've really come through some stuff, I'll tell you. And we still have certainly plenty of stuff to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Not these kinds of things are just minor, little frustrations. And I do tweak it, try to make it better, but sometimes it tweaks us right back. So you got to laugh about it because it is kind of funny. But hey, let's go ahead with our text for tonight. Give it a read and get a little comic relief here. See where we are. Okay, we're going to go right down here. I'm going to have to turn my screen up a little bit so I can read this. Here we go. And here we go. So this is Luke 16, 19 to 31. And it's going to be a 3-pager tonight because it's a little bit longer than we've had recently, a bit longer narrative. So, anyways, we'll talk about the details when we get to it, all right? So Luke 16, 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us is a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they may not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." There you go. All right, may God bless us in our study here. Hey, the good news is our screen isn't flashing back and forth. That's a plus. We're going to go with that. All right, here we go. Let's jump right back in here. Verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and who feasted sumptuously every day. Wow, good for him. So, by the way, purple was a very, very expensive cloth. That's why the text goes to the trouble of telling us what color the cloth is. Because people in the early days, back in the 1st century, when they read this, they would they would know right away, oh, he had purple cloth. That's a really expensive cloth. And he's feasting sumptuously every single day. So there's an old painting about this. Let me see if I can dig this up here. This is by Gabriel Metsu. He was a Dutch painter around 1650. And here we go. And so I might even expand this here for you guys so you can see this a little bit better. Let me do that. And there we go, a little bit better. So down here we got Lazarus on the steps. That's the guy there at the bottom, and he's got a pale face because he's sickly and all that kind of stuff. The fellow to his right is a jester. You got to remember when these things were painted. This was painted in 1650, so they have a little bit of the local tradition, part of the local history involved there. So a court jester would be something that they would know about. There he is. He's making fun of him. And then over on just beyond my right shoulder there's a fellow up in a balcony, and he has a tablecloth hanging down there with a bunch of pieces of bread and stuff on the bottom. And I don't think you can see it there very well, but just over my right shoulder is a dog right there. That dog is eating the stuff coming off the table that's being dumped over the balcony. There's another dog on the steps, nice load of food going up the steps there to the table. Now when you look there in the background, then the dimmer light is the man who's having the sumptuous meal every sinple day. And there's even, if you can see it on the very top right hand corner there, there's more bread being brought in. So there's the scene as remember from like 1650. Okay, give us a little bit of visual anyway, right? And at his gate, this is verse 20, lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores. Now I said we were going to have two Lazaruses talked about tonight. And you may think of right away, when you think of the name Lazarus, oh, isn't that isn't that the brother of Mary and Martha, who was a friend of Jesus? And isn't he the one who died, and then Jesus came and called him out of the tomb, and Lazarus came out of the tomb? Well, as a matter of fact, that is who that is. That's a different person than this Lazarus. However, as we get through this lesson tonight, you're going to see how these two stories are actually very much connected. So it's really not an accident that both of these characters have the same name. So, but in this case, as you saw in the painting there, this is a sick person. He's at the gate, down the stairs from the house, and what the painting showed, but at the gate of this rich person's house, and he is he's covered with sores. So there's no description. It's almost kind of a wonder that it didn't just say leprosy, because it was the assumption in those days, if you had any kind of a skin infection, that you had leprosy, even though that might not be the actual diagnosis. People were still, considered to have leprosy if there was something. We got to realize it was, before modern medicine. So when people saw something like this, they thought the worst, and leprosy was a very frightening disease to them. They didn't understand how it actually works. We know a lot more about it today. But in those days, they didn't understand how that works, and it seemed like it was like a plague in the land. And people that got this thing, and they were afraid of it spreading to other people. And so, anyways, anybody who had what they thought was leprosy would be ostracized by the community. They would be, pushed away from the house of worship, away from their families, away from work, and they had to sometimes, congregate together as people with similar disorders, just to have some kind of community around them. But and they would, be the people sometimes you would see begging by the roadside, but they had rules in those days that you not get close to a person with leprosy. This is not all that different from the, what do we call it, shelter-in-place kind of thing we did during COVID, and as is going on currently in China right now, the restrictions of travel and forcing people to stay home. Well, they did that thousands of years ago. And the people with leprosy were just not allowed to mix with anybody else. And so you were by law required to stay away from them. And by law, they were required to ring a bell and cry out unclean anytime somebody got close to them, so they wouldn't accidentally get an infection from them. Now, leprosy doesn't actually spread like that, but that's what they thought. And there was a lot of fear around that. So yeah, some of the things we practice today aren't all that different from what they were doing back then. But these people were ostracized, and poverty could very well have been the result of the illness, not the result of his losing a job for some other reason or whatever. But people that had these kinds of infirmities were often poor, and they were relegated to trying to scratch out a living along the roadside and hoping for the generosity of some passerby. So this man didn't get much generosity, because the rich guy up in the house was eating all the food, and he was wasting away right there, literally on the threshold of the man's house, right? Just hoping probably that somebody would give him something sustaining. So that's the way the story is set up. Now, we're not talking about historical story here, of course. I mean, Jesus is telling a story, and these are the characters in that story. But these situations were not foreign to the listeners in his crowd. I mean, this is the way the world was, and so the image he's using here is a common image that people would have easily recognized, and a lot of people could have related to. Now, if you back up a little bit before the beginning of this lesson, you go back into Luke chapter 16, some of the earlier verses, Jesus is in conflict with the Pharisees and the scribes over these very issues about possessions and wealth and power, which are really certainly the backdrop of this particular lesson for tonight. And of course, we'll use this lesson for Sunday. So it's this issue about does power and wealth get in the way of one's ability to recognize the needs that are maybe right at their doorstep, and does it keep one from being generous? Those kinds of things. So that's a conversation he was having with the religious leaders of the day when he went into this illustration. So this is in response to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, really trying to drive home a point with those people who happen to be the most powerful people in the community. So they're the ones with wealth and power, and so this is a very pointed kind of parable here, because it really singles them out. You can see who they are represented in the rich man with the fine clothing and fine food here in this story. So there's Lazarus. Okay, verse 21. He longed to satisfy his hunger with what would fall from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. I just want to go back to that painting again, because what falls from the rich man's table. There you go. Right-hand side of that painting from 1650 of them dumping the contents, clearing off a tablecloth and switching it out, and then the food remnants that are falling down there on the ground, and then the dogs that are represented there, on the steps, and also at the where that tablecloth is at, and the dogs would come and lick his sores, which is a sign that the man was at an extremely helpless stage. He couldn't even fend off the animals. Now, as odd as that might sound to us in our modern world, because our relationship to dogs and other animals is quite different today than it would have been even just a few years ago. Our pets have taken a much more prominent role in our family structures than anyone would have ever imagined in years gone by. So if you go back, 20 centuries, they just didn't have affection for animals in the way that we do. They saw things very differently. If you go to other parts of the world, emerging countries, for instance, you'll see a lot of dogs on the streets that have no owners. They just scavenge for themselves. In their natural habitat, a dog is a scavenging animal. That is what they do. They're on a cleanup crew. They're kind of like vultures in a sense out in the wild. So, it's just different in other cultures. And these would have been dogs on the streets. They probably weren't the pets of the homeowner, and they're maybe traveling in packs or whatever. So a person who was sick and on the ground would be pretty helpless, maybe, to do anything about it. And certainly this man is in a very weak state, and really that's what that speaks to. So verse 22: the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. All right, there's some cool stuff going on just in that one little passage right there. We're going to spend a little time taking a look at that, because let me see here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything, right? Okay, so the carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. Isn't that kind of a lovely sort of illustration there? It turns out that the idea of for the righteous to be, when they die, what happens to them, the idea of being carried off to be with Father Abraham was a thing back in the first century when they thought that the angels literally would take you there. So this was a popular idea that Jesus mentioned in the lesson here that, pretty much everybody around would have resonated with, because it was it was part of the culture of the time, and they really thought that's the way it worked. That the angels would carry them person to Abraham. And now you and I might not think of Abraham first of all as the destination in the hereafter, but that's the way they thought about it, because they were Jewish people, and they weren't thinking of St. Peter, at the pearly gates. The jokes about at the pearly gates. They were thinking about that. Right, St. Peter didn't have that position in church tradition yet. So they were thinking about the covenants with Abraham, and so they called him Father Abraham because the promise had been made to Abraham and Sarah, his wife, that they would be the parents of a great nation. And it's a really cool story the way that all plays out. You can check it out sometime on your own. But promises made that they're going to have a son. It's very late in their senior years, but eventually God's promises come through, and the whole nation of Israel, tracks their history back to Abraham and Sarah. So there is this idea that as things come full circle for the Jewish person, then they're not going to expect to meet St. Peter. They're expecting to be received by Father Abraham, of all people. That's right. And sort of the father of their story, at the beginning of that story. And so, that's worth a read sometimes to hear where that story of the Hebrew people began, at least it's remembered in that way, through Abraham and Sarah. So that's just it. That's the homecoming. That's where they're going to go back to. And that's what they're looking forward to. So Lazarus, who's not wealthy, who's not rich, who has spent a life in misery with whatever disease it is or problem that he has, and not enough to eat, poor guy. And now he passes away, and then there's this wonderful, traditional homecoming experience into the hereafter with Father Abraham and the angels. It's really a beautiful thing. But take a look at the other person in this particular verse here. The rich man also died, and what happened with him? He was buried. Okay, so you'll notice that there's nothing said here about Lazarus being buried. Well, that's because he's a pauper, and so without being poor, being homeless, that kind of thing, he didn't have the fancy funeral, and the paid mourners and all those things that you would expect. In fact, as we talk about the other Lazarus here in a few minutes, that Lazarus, friend of Jesus and brother of Mary and Martha, there were mourners there. There was a whole group of people around that, and it was really 3 days had passed, and people were still there mourning. I mean, that was more of the traditional kind of funeral that would happen for people with some money and people with a position, some power. So that's one of the ways that we can know that Lazarus and Mary and Martha were, probably pretty well off. Well, certainly the sumptuously eating man in this story was well off, and so he had a burial. But Lazarus, we don't know about. I don't know. Did the dogs drag him away? Hopefully not. But what we do know is that his spirit went to be with Abraham. And so the rich man then, and here's a good example of this, by the way, because at this moment, I guess yesterday was the end of the ceremonies around the funeral for the Queen of England, right? And that went on for days, and all the fanfare goes around that, and world leaders coming and everything like that. And of course, you and I know that she wasn't present for that, right? I mean, the fact of the matter was, her body was there, but we believe that the body is the vehicle of the spirit, and that ultimately, in the end of time, we talk about a bodily resurrection, but not at this stage. And we talk about the spirit going to be with God. So as in the story here with Lazarus, the angels come and take him up to Abraham. And so the rich man goes someplace too. right? And he goes to that place even while the guests are, coming to his fine home, and everybody's going through all the traditions and the mourning and the, the feasting, whatever goes with that, for how many days. While he's already out, he's already checked out, right? He's out the door while these things are going on. Not all that different than with the Queen of England. Okay, so in verse 23, we find out where he went. So in Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. Okay, so we're talking about an after-death place. Again, a parable of Jesus. Jesus is not trying to be scientific here, right? It's a faith story, but nonetheless, talking about the traditions of the Jews, their understanding of death, and we get some insight here into how people in those days thought about the hereafter. And for them, there was this place of Hades. And there's another name for it here. I'm going to bring it up here if I can find it. Right there. Okay, so this is from Psalm 139, verses 7 and 8. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol. So Sheol is the Hebrew word for the afterlife, and Hades is actually, we're actually talking about, let's go back up here. Hades is actually the Greek version. And you got to remember that the New Testament was written in Greek, right? Okay, so Hades and Sheol are basically the same thing. Now, what is that? Well, it's a sort of a land of slumbers and a land, an in-between place. Not purgatory, that's a whole other thing that's in the Catholic Church tradition. Not in the Protestant tradition, but part of that Catholic history, but that's not what this is about. Okay, so Sheol and Hades is a sort of a staging area till the end of time, till the final judgment comes. And there's some curious things about it here in this particular story, and that is that the rich man is tormented, and his, there's going to be some description of what his torment was here in this place. But he's tormented, and then he can see Lazarus. He can actually see him, and he can see him with Abraham, and yet there is a distance, but the distance isn't so great that Abraham and Lazarus can't hear him because he's talking to Father Abraham. So it's a very curious kind of a thing in the story here with Hades. But whatever this place is, they can see each other and they can communicate, but they can't actually be in the same place. All right, so there's that. So he calls out Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. Now, there's right away we kind of think of the traditional hell, right? You think about flames and pots of boiling oil and all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, that's really a Christian development. A lot of that has to do with more with church history than it does with the Bible, but we get more of those images in the book of Revelation. But we're not in that book. We're in the book of Luke, and we're also dealing with a very Hebrew story here. So that let's not make the assumption that's the same exact thing. Some scholars think that the reference here to fire really has as much to do with either with purification, which is one possibility in this in-between space after death, before final judgment, perhaps. But also there is an Old Testament concept that being in the presence of God is being in the fire of God. And that fire, like I said, can be a good fire of purification. It can also be one that brings torment depending on the state of our soul. So it's a different and more nuanced meaning than we might find in Revelation or in church history. But in this place, you can see that this particular individual, he really hasn't changed his prejudices or anything, because look at what he's saying here. He wants Lazarus to serve him, right? You tell Lazarus, be a good servant, be a good slave. Going to dip his finger in the water, bring it down here and put it on my tongue. I mean, seriously? Seriously? And I think that's the point of this here, that the arrogance, that hardness of heart, those deep-seated prejudices, racial, whatever those things might be, this quite often follow people right into the grave. I mean, this is a sad statement of that. I heard some years ago from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was really the pioneer of the hospice movement. And I was reading some of her material years ago, and she said, you really don't see deathbed conversions. People die the way they live. And so that kind of blows that Hollywood mystique out of the water, because not really. You really don't see people's big change of heart on their deathbed. It really doesn't happen. And so people, I guess it's who they are going to be what they take most likely into the hereafter. And so we get some insight into that in this little passage. And it, this rich man, he hasn't changed a bit. So, takes a lot of nerve, doesn't it? Anyways, verse 25, but Abraham said, child, remember that during your lifetime, you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. Ooh, interesting distinction there. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. What we're seeing here is a reversal of fortunes. And this is a common theme to a lot of the preaching of Jesus. In fact, it goes back, it predates Jesus with the Magnificat. That is the song attributed to his mother, also from the Gospel of Luke. And that's a fun read, too, to go back and give that a read. You'll find that like in, I don't know, latter part of the first chapter, maybe in the second chapter of the Gospel of Luke. And she is, talking about the child she's bringing into the world, of course, the baby Jesus, of course. But in that Magnificat, she talks about also the reversals of fortune and how the rich will be brought low and the lowly will be lifted up. So Jesus is talking about that coming true in his word as he's talking about the story of Lazarus and the rich man here. So things are going to get turned around. Things are going to be reversed. And interestingly, he says here that Lazarus received evil things. That's different than, Lazarus had an unfortunate life. It's different than accidents happen or anything like that. It shows that he was a victim. And so he suffered at the scorn or at the hatred of other people. And fair to say that in the story, one of those people would be the rich man who didn't share what he had with his poor soul who was wasting away on his steps. So he received evil. He received the scorn of others. He received the prejudice of others. Maybe even was racial. Who knows his origin? But whatever the case might be, he suffered at the evil of other people. And so it categorizes. By the way, it categorizes that it categorizes indifference and being in a position of power and of wealth, and it's something we all need to reckon with, because we do live in, if not the richest country in the world, one of, right? Probably Dubai is considered a lot richer than us, but nonetheless, we got it pretty good, and compared to so many other people in the world, right? And so that that intentional ignorance of the needs around us, that apathy, that's an evil, an act of evil against those who are suffering. So, pretty serious word here, right? Okay. It's one of the reasons why we all need Jesus for forgiveness. You know that. Okay, so besides all this is verse 26. Between you and us, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from here there to us. There is this separation. I would say maybe this is metaphorical in the sense that that gulf that exists between the haves and the have-nots. We talk about it in this country, and it's a reality that there's a disappearing middle class, and the wealthy are getting wealthier and more powerful, and those who don't have that wealth are becoming poorer and more disadvantaged. That there is this gulf between the two that cannot be crossed. At least it's really difficult. So it's kind of a metaphor there for the way things don't work the way they should, the way God intends that they work. Okay, so I want to take another look here at. I don't want to miss something here. Just take a quick look at what I got hanging up here. Oh, okay, there's that. Okay, there's that, and I'm refreshing my memory here. All right, that's what I'm doing. All right, okay, we'll get there. He said, verse 27. He said, "Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house." So you can see that he's the rich man was in the lineage and the inheritance of the family there. And he's asking, he wants again, here we go, he wants Lazarus to be his servant and be the one who goes down and talks to his family. So, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment. So, yeah, send him down there, and maybe he'll straighten them out, and everybody else will change their life. Yeah, Abraham's like, this is verse 29. Good luck with that. That's basically what he says. Yeah, good luck with that. Abraham replied, they have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them. Now, let's just remember here for a moment who it is that Jesus is speaking with. He's talking about Pharisees and scribes or Sadducees, those guys, the leaders of the Hebrew faith. And so what do those folks have as their database? But the law and the prophets, okay? The writings of Moses they held them that way traditionally, and the writings of the prophets. And they're the ones that know these things. They know these things better than anybody else knows them. And yet, there is corruption among the powerful and the wealthy, even though they're the keepers of the sacred text. This is a slam going on here in this verse of 29 here. Hey, they have Moses and the prophets, but they're still clueless, right? Well, what they really should do is read the scriptures that they have such control over, and then take them to heart and actually shape their lives around those scriptures, rather than living in the corruption that they live in. So, yeah, this is a pretty direct slam here on the people that Jesus is dealing with. All right, but it calls out power and wealth everywhere it is in the world. I mean, this is that has a general application, around the world here. So verse 30, he said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." You notice that this man, this guy's dead, right? So he's in torment of Hades. He's in the bad end of things down there. And, and yet he still thinks not only should he be able to order Lazarus around, he's actually arguing with Father Abraham. So, it takes a lot. That takes a lot of audacity, doesn't it? He's brave or crazy. I don't know. I'd probably argue that Father Abraham's a bad idea and hereafter, but that's what he's doing, trying to reason his way out of this thing, negotiate his way out of this thing. I'm just going to make a slight mention here, but in the world of contemporary politics, a lot of times things that get said, they don't have to make sense, and they can be off the wall and just makes everybody scratch their head. But there are those who will come out and say it anyway, because it reveals something. I mean, it tells you about what the character of that individual is about, and just how lost they are, and how self-centered and selfish they are, unable to see beyond their prejudices, unable to see beyond their own sense of self-righteousness, which is so out of whack. So there's very contemporary examples of this that we're seeing right now in the news today going on, and this is where this guy is at, right? So there you go. They should listen to him. So this verse 31, we're going to spend a little time on this one because we're going to branch out here now. He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." All right, so this particular verse right here, verse 31, this one here, it launches into a whole bunch of stuff. And it also describes a lot of what we're dealing with here. We're talking about what's going on in this particular passage altogether. The narrative line, the storyline from this book of Luke, where this confrontation is happening between Jesus and the religious leaders. Okay, not listening to Moses, not listening to the law and the prophets, and they're not going to be convinced even if somebody look at that, rises from the dead. Now, mind you, in the illustration here, and again, it is just an illustration, but in the illustration, these people are dead. So the rich man and Lazarus, they're dead. And so he wants to make a servant of Lazarus to bring him water and go down to warn his brothers and things like that. Okay, so we're talking about the spirit of Lazarus doing these things. We're not actually talking about somebody rising from the dead here. It could be the spirit in a dream, a ghost, I don't know, call it what you want. But rising from the dead, that's an interesting way to say this. And so, of course, right away, you're probably thinking of Jesus rising from the dead. That's what I'm thinking about. And there is that other Lazarus, right? Okay, so Jesus called him out of the tomb, called upon the Father, and out came Lazarus after he was dead for how many days? He was dead for like 3 days, right? Little parallel there. How long was Jesus? Let's see, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to the day of resurrection on the third day. And, these aren't accidental parallels. And so when you see connections like this, there's always that question, well, did Jesus say these exact words? Or are these words attributed to Jesus after the event of the raising of Lazarus, or even after the resurrection of Jesus? Did these stories all of a sudden take final form around those understandings? Well, it's kind of inconsequential, really, because the point of it's the same. And that is that when the resurrection happens, whether it's the resurrection of this Lazarus or the other Lazarus or of Jesus, they're just going to be folks in the world that aren't convinced. And it's not going to make any difference to them, no matter what, even if someone does rise from the dead. So no matter what you think the historical context is of the passage, whether this came together later and they're reflecting back through Easter, or whether these are the literal words of Jesus, the point is it doesn't change the point. And that's one of the things about biblical interpretation it's important to remember. And that is that we try to understand the context or what influences were on that text and what the history was of the transmission of that text and all of those things to help us get a clear understanding of the audience and what was being said and things like that. But the power of the truth of the message is continues to be there even as we try to understand all these other factors around it. And there it is. What difference does it make if someone rises from the dead? Well, for some people, it makes no difference at all. And for millions of others, of course, it makes all the difference in the world, or we wouldn't be here tonight. Am I right? Okay, so, it's just part of the mystery and part of the frustration of working with folks, because you want the best for everybody. I like to see everybody on the other side of Hades. but that's just the way it is. People take that, like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, and they take it with them right to the grave. And that's the sad reality of this here. So I want to talk about a couple of things here because this story is about being in the bosom of Abraham. And I don't know if maybe in the King James Version they actually use that terminology. I think maybe they do. And it's the only place in all of the Bible where that's actually spoken about. So this passage from the Gospel of Luke is it. This is the only one that literally talks about, somebody being in the bosom of Abraham. And so you might remember that old song that used to be sung, "A Rock of My Soul in the Bosom of Abraham," right? Okay, so that's why we started off with that illustration at the beginning, in the funny part of the evening here tonight, along with all the other funny things going on, right? So, why don't you rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham? Why don't you rock my soul in the bosom of Abraham? There it is. This is a sculpture, probably from a cathedral someplace. I don't know the location, but that is the illustration here in this piece of stonework of Abraham. And then the believers, they are prayerful, their hands folded, and he's literally holding them up to the level of his chest there, being there in the bosom of Abraham. How cool is that, right? And let me see here. I want to show you this too, because all kind of goodies here. Oh, here's this back again. So there's we talked about how the idea of rising from the dead relates to two different Lazaruses and also to Jesus himself. By the way, the raising of Lazarus time-wise came just a couple weeks after Jesus, as far as we can tell. Just a couple weeks after Jesus told the story, as we know it in the Gospel of Luke. A couple weeks later, the raising of Lazarus, and then like a week or two later, about 2 weeks later, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So these things are boom, 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 happen in quick succession here. I'll put this picture up here because this is from John chapter 13. There was at the table reclining in Jesus' bosom one of the disciples whom Jesus loved. And this, of course, is a depiction of the Last Supper, but it's a very different kind of painting than what we traditionally think of, because we think of Da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper usually, and as beautiful as that and masterful as his work is, it's not historically accurate. So from the understanding of that particular point in time, Da Vinci was painting as people believed things would have been. But since that time, with greater archaeology and doing the literary studies of the scriptures and other works from the first century, and whatnot, we came to realize that was they didn't sit around the table on one side. That's not what they did. In fact, the traditional way to have a Seder in those days, a Passover meal, which is what they were doing in Jerusalem, is to recline. And so if you can see it okay in this painting, that the people there are all kind of lounging on pillows and things like that. This is probably more accurate to what actually took place. I don't know who painted this, but you can see there how they're reclined. And they kind of lean into each other. And so as the story goes here, there was one reclining in Jesus' bosom. That was an unnamed disciple, but that his head was placed on Jesus' chest or was close to that. As they sat in this kind of position, that would have been a fairly natural thing to have happen. I just wanted you to see that idea around that. I want to also go here too, because we're talking about being raised from the dead. Now this is an old etching. I don't have the painter or the artist for this one either. Probably from a Bible illustration in the 19th century. And you can see here's Lazarus coming out of the tomb here on the left as very large accommodations in there, by the way. A nice big cave with several tombs lined up in a row in there. Who knows how it actually was. But that raising of Lazarus. So that's the tie-in between the one lesson and the other lesson, between these two people. Lazarus in the story, and then the Lazarus Jesus raised. But then again, a precursor of things to come. The amazing thing is, and this is borne out here by this passage here, about if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will neither be convinced if someone rises from the dead. The calling of Lazarus from the tomb was no small deal. I mean, the guy was dead. And so it's a phenomenal miracle that happened. And rather than the people of power and authority and wealth, Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and others, coming to faith, learning about this incredible miracle and the power and authority of Jesus Christ, rather than coming to faith, they actually plotted to kill Lazarus. You find that in the Gospel of John. And of course, then they killed Jesus for sure. So, it made no difference to them if someone rises from the dead. It didn't change their minds. In fact, it may have hastened the death of Jesus, as a matter of fact, might have brought it on all the more quickly than anticipated. So there you go. So again, a little insight there also tonight into that middle ground, right? That Sheol, that Hades place that they believed in those days. We tend to, as a modern Christian people, to think of it a lot more direct, like we pass away and then boom, we're going to see St. Peter or maybe Abraham. And there's a couple reasons why we've got that tradition, but one of those has to do with the narrative around Jesus on the cross, speaking with the prisoners and who were there with him on the cross, and saying to one of them that you will be with me this day in paradise. And so this whole belief structure came out of that passage about, it must be immediate. There's not going to really be a Hades. We're just going to go right there. Well, who knows? We'll figure it out when we get there, right? So, but the good news here is that for those who trust in the Lord, and just like we heard last week with John 3:16, right? God so loves the world. Those who trust in the Lord are the ones who get carried up to Father Abraham by the angels. And do we in this life need to reckon with our power and our wealth? We most certainly do. And not be sucked in by, these games that get played, whether it's in politics or in business or anywhere else, about, how important power is, and wealth and those things. I know we all want to live a good life and do as well as we can and all that. That's understandable. But at the same time, we need to be sensitive to the needs around us so we not miss those needs, and that we genuinely care for the people in need in God's creation. So there we go. Okay, we'll be talking about that some more on Sunday. Of course we will. Okay, let's go back out here in the woods. And there we go. And we don't quite have that kind of color around here yet, but we have a few maple trees out here in our parking lot, and they are getting this color right here. They're starting to get really pretty. So I don't know how much color we're going to have because like a lot of parts of the country, we had a lot of drought this year, and that affects the way the color goes. In fact, the coloring has been coming earlier this year than normally. So things are changing, all part of what's going on. Anyways, in the meantime, we are going to turn to prayer here, and I invite your participation in that. I want to share with you our prayer requests we have tonight. So tonight we'll be praying for Mandy and Mary Lou and Wanda and Bonnie and Bruce and Mike, Kathy and Charlie, Sharon and John. All right, let's be in prayer. Lord, help us reckon with the power that we have, because we all have some, and maybe we have a lot. And humble our hearts before you, and help us to see us as your servants, and that we're called here to be a blessing to the people of your world, and that we are to be mindful of those around us who are in particular need. And also remind us, if we are in that place of need right now, that you love us completely, and that your presence and your power is there for us. And we can be your righteous people, no matter what our station in life happens to be, whatever our situation happens to be, as we seek you and humble our hearts before you and seek your encouragement and strength in the things that we face. So whether we're at the bottom of those steps, on that threshold of poverty and struggle and pain, or whether we're in some place where our meals are sumptuous, your calling comes to each of us the same. We turn our hearts to you, trust in you, and seek to be a blessing to the people around us. It's in that capacity that we remember those today we mentioned by name and entrust them to your loving care. And we ask that those near them will be a means by which they are blessed, that they will know of your love that is poured out for their sake. And tonight we offer up to you, Lord, our troubled world, and the many, many things that are out there that we're watching and wondering and worrying about. And we ask that you give us the encouragement of your love that never ends, that in all things there is the opportunity to be faithful and to witness to your saving grace and to be a means by which others see your light. So encourage us in that important work we have to do even in these times, and give us your peace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks for being here tonight. It is always a blessing, isn't it? It's a blessing to share in God's word together and have a chance to think about it and pray about it and talk about it and all that good stuff. I apologize. We had to struggle to get our camera straightened out here at the beginning. It's the never-ending process, but let's hope next week it'll be trouble-free. But that really isn't the point, is it? And that we can just have this time together and share the scriptures is such a blessing. So thanks be to God for that. So come see us on Sunday. Worship's at 10 o'clock. If you can't be physically at the church, you can be right here on one of our platforms, Zoom or Facebook or YouTube. Love to have you here with us. So in the meantime, take care. God bless. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. And have a good night.